Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us for Vintage Books Live. I'm really excited to have two authors again. We have 2 weeks in a row with two authors. We have two, this time, younger kids' books. So last week we had a couple of YA authors, and this week we have some middle grade authors. We have Vikram Madan and Chrissie Krebs. Vikram is up in the Puget Sound area, so in the same time zone as we are. But Chrissy is in a slightly different time zone. She's coming to us all the way from Australia. So that's kind of fun because I've never interviewed. She's like holds the honor for the furthest away we've done on the show. So that's kind of fun. But they are both middle grade authors. They both work in more graphic formats, so some graphic novels or just highly illustrated books. And so I'm very excited to talk to them a little bit about that, how that works for them and what their process is. um Vikram, I'm going to start with you. Your most recent book is Zuni Tales. Yay. And it just came out. Well, both of you have had books come out just in the last few weeks because I know we just got them up on the shelf. Yay! And Christy's book there too. That's exciting. And I would love for you, because I got to be on. Oh, yay. Well, we'll have pet introduction. There will for sure be pet introduction. But I actually had the opportunity of having dinner with Vikram back at Children's Institute. And so I got to hear a little bit about the behind the scenes of Zuni Tales. And so I would love for you to start us off just by talking about Zuni Tales in particular, but we'll widen out to some of your other stuff in a little bit. But how Zuni Tales came to be.
So the word Zuni is a name of my dog. She's a COVID puppy,
Yay.
and she's the sweetest dog in the world, and you know that because it says so in the book. So early in COVID, my kids were back home from college, and the family was getting on each other's nerves, and we had cabin fever. And then all my life, I told my kids, no dog, too much work. But finally, the kids said, now we're all home. Can we get a dog? And so we searched for a dog and could not find one because everybody wanted a COVID puppy.
Yeah.
And then one day we got a call saying this family is giving up a pup. Would you like to adopt it? And so we said, yes, of course. And we took the pup and we named her Zuni. So the word Zun means moon. And Zuni is like a cute name for little girls. So my daughter named the dog Zuni. And I used to call her Zuni Mooney. And one day I thought to myself, that sounds like the title of a book, Zuni and Mooney. So what if this was a book and it had a dog character in it? And the puppy turned out to be like this, literally the sweetest puppy. She's very warm and loving and kind. And I try to imagine if there was a character who was warm and loving and kind and empathetic and friendly, and I personified her, my dog's qualities in this character, could that form a seed for a book? And I have done a bunch of books before, including this one, which is called A Hatful of Dragons. This is a collection of funny poems. So I've been writing poetry for a long time. I grew up in India. I've been writing poetry since I was 8 years old. So when I started formulating the idea for Zuni Tales, I started thinking about how can I make this different, and what if this book was in rhyme? Because hey, I've
Mm.
written poetry collections. I'm sure I can write a book in rhyme. And so I noodled with the idea and I put together a manuscript for a single story about a pup and her cat friend, so Zuni and Moni, dog and cat. And I wrote it in rhyme, which turned out to be very challenging. Sent it
Mm.
out. Um, when it reached Holiday House is the publisher for both our books. When it reached Holiday House, the editor loved it, but she wanted a thicker book with lots of stories. And so she made me shrink the story down from 72 pages to 30 pages and add a whole bunch more and then add a second book. So what started off as this little exercise of writing one story in rhyme turned out into this marathon of writing 10 things in rhyme over two
Yeah.
books. And so
Well, and
yes,
that was one thing that I noticed when I was flipping through Zuni Tales is that it's almost like it's not even really chapters. Like it's like there's a story, but then there's kind of a poem, and then there's another story, and there's another poem. So it's I think that was really interesting. Was that something that when you needed to make it longer, that you kind of turned to like having almost like a variety of different approaches in the book?
right. Partly the format is my editor's idea. So she's the visionary behind the format of the book. So I just wanted to write one story, 72 pages, and be done. But she said, let's do 3 stories in each book, but let's also
Yeah.
break it up to give a little variety and put what she called mini comics.
Mhm.
So if kids have read books like, um, there's a few books out there. Some of them have this idea of little mini comics interspersing the larger stories, and that just creates enough of a variety for kids to keep it interesting. And
Yeah.
so we decided we would do 3 stories, each of them in rhyme, and then intersperse it with little poem comics, so like poetry comics. So the stories are all driven through dialogue. There is no narrative text in the stories, and the poems are narrative poems with almost no dialogue. So that creates this
Interesting. Yeah.
twin format that I hope kids
Yeah.
will enjoy.
Well, and I think it's interesting just from a like to, a geeky educational perspective of like presenting different types of narration in the same book, and it's longer and shorter, and whether it's all dialogue or whether it's all description. It's just kind of a fun way to mix it up. When, kids, because I think it's interesting how much kids pick up from whatever they're reading, and that we can introduce all kinds of ideas that they then will use later when, oh yeah, I know what description means, or I know what this means. Or even if they don't know the words description and dialogue, they've seen it. And
Correct. So yeah, rhyme is, librarians and teachers know this well, that rhyme is really a formative thing that helps kids develop reading and comprehension skills. That's why we start with little lullabies and nursery rhymes and work kids up to, that's why Dr. Seuss books and early readers and
yeah,
rhyme remain
yeah,
popular. And so the rhyme is really a foundational exposure for helping literacy. And then when I'm writing rhymes, it's interesting, the book I did with Holiday House before this, which is Owl and Penguin. So
yes.
this is a graphic
Mhm.
novel for really beginning readers and pre-readers, ages 3 to 6, and limited vocabulary. All the words in this are chosen from a basic sight reading list. But when I started writing this, I decided not to constrain myself to sight reading words or expected vocabulary, because I always like the idea that kids should have books they grow into, and how
Yeah,
they're going to learn new
yeah.
concepts if they don't actually come
Mhm.
across them in the books they're reading.
Right,
So there
right.
is a vocabulary in this that a kid in that early reader 5 to 8 age may not otherwise experience. I am perfectly fine with it. So I hope
Yeah,
parents and
yeah.
teachers will also be fine with it.
I love that. I have a question for you about rhyme that I'm going to come back to, but I want to jump over to Chrissy. So we kind of go back and forth. I was I was prepping for the interview tonight, so I pulled out our copy of is when you think it in your head, is it Bizard or Bazard? How do you think of it?
It's Bizzard, as
Oh,
in like
wizard.
rhyming with
Oh,
wizard.
wizard. Okay, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. See, it's the reader's dilemma. It's like you read it and you're like, oh yeah, I know what that is. And then you have to say it out loud and you're like, oh no.
My
Well,
mother calls it Bizard though, but
yeah.
so you
Yeah,
do
I
have
didn't
a
even think
point.
about, I mean, and I know from reading the story that it's a combination of bear and wizard, but for some reason the I became a long I. I don't know. And I am just honestly at the first question I have to ask, because I'm going through this story thinking, this is amazing. I love this. And also, how on earth did you get an idea for the bear to have a wand fall on his head?
Well, it came because I was looking in my local bookstore, and I was seeing all these unicorn books, and I think I was a little bit jealous because I had a picture book out at the time, and it was just, in the corner of the bookshop, not getting much love. And I was looking at all these unicorn books that they were praising, and I was thinking, what's so good about unicorns? I was just getting a little bit, salty about it. And so I decided, to think about, coming up with what type of other animals could have a horn on their head. I know there was jellyfish and narwhal. Oh, look, we've got a beautiful little kitty there. So jellyfish and narwhal, I think it was. And I thought, okay, so narwhals have already been done. What about a big animal? And so I started sketching, and I came up with a bear with a horn in its head, really. And so I started with the illustration first before I even developed the story. So that's how it began, really.
Well, so you have Bizzard.
It's going to be hard for you to say.
I don't know why that doesn't work in my head. And Vikram actually held it up earlier. And then you have another one coming out in the spring. Yeah,
yes.
There we go.
Bizzard and the Big Bunny Business. So that's coming out. I think it's in February. It might be coming out next year.
I looked it up this afternoon, but I cannot remember. But yeah, I know it's in only a couple of months. And so you actually mentioned something that is related to a question that I was going to ask later. So I'll just move it up. You talked about the fact that in this particular case, the picture came first. You were sketching the picture, and then the story grew out of that. Is that typical for your process? Do you tend to draw the pictures first, or do you, you have the bear with the horn, and then you go write the story and then you write pictures, or do you tend to do pictures first and then come back to the story?
I want to know the character first. I do consider myself an illustrator first before a writer. Even though I've written a number of books, I've found that I only write in order to illustrate, which is really quite backwards, I guess, for a lot of people. But I just find that I want to know the character first. And so I draw the picture, a number of pictures. I drew Bizzard quite a number of times before I got to the point where I knew what type of personality he had. And I just found from that particular angle, it was easier for me to actually write his character once I drew him and I had him up on my wall. And I even drew the other characters then after a while. And then, oh, I'm so sorry, Kat.
It's
okay. So I drew him and his friends, Owl and Fox and Squirrel, just a number of times just to get a feeling for what type of characters they are. And so, it was really an image first and then writing later.
Is that true for you on your other work as well? Or was it just this particular one?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I actually start, and when I start thinking, okay, I want to come up with a new idea, I just start sketching out all different things, all different animals, all different people. And it's almost like automatic writing, I suppose, in a way, but it's automatic drawing. So I'll just start drawing character faces and things like that and putting together bits and pieces. And then it's only through that particular process that I actually start developing a story in my head. And thanks to Margaret Ferguson, my wonderful editor, I mean, she greatly helped me with steering my story for the first two books. Yeah.
So Vikram, how about for you? When you're in the beginning of the creative process and you're playing around with an idea or just starting to write, do you draw first? Do you write first and brainstorm? Do you do a little bit of both? How does that work for you?
It's usually a little bit of both. I think the way I'll start is I'll definitely sketch out characters, trying to find a look that feels right for that particular book. And then as I'm thinking about a story, I will tell you my background is engineering. and I worked in software for most of my life, so I have almost no formal training in or even exposure to liberal arts. So all my writing is kind of it's a self-developed skill. And so when I'm writing a story, I do struggle with trying to create a narrative arc that feels satisfying. And I really try to work hard on getting an ending that feels good. And then once I've got this arc loosely set in my head of, these are the key points that are going to happen across the story, then I'll start sketching it out and try to see what it looks like laid out as comic panels. And one thing with every book is you have a fixed format. So you know how many pages usually. And so you've got to fit your story in that page, in that number of pages you have.
Yeah.
And you have to make sure that the pacing is correct and it's not dragging. And, as artists, we would love to draw and really slow down. It's like having an artistic movie where it takes a long time to go through a scene. Artists can do that very easily. You can just keep drawing the scene from for a long time through the book, but you have to keep the pacing correct. You want it to have its beats. You want it to move forward. And so I usually work that out through very loose sketches. I do a lot of my sketching and drawing for my books on my iPad. So I try to use an app that does not give me any tools, just has a paper and a pencil. And that way I'm not tempted to try and make it too fine or start fussing with the details. I can't even erase or delete properly in that app. So I'm just sketching, and trying to see if I get the story right. Then I'll go back and for a book that's in rhyme. Now the rhyme was the challenge. So now I have to get the dialogue to flow across the story I want to tell, and it has to sound natural. And so I will then start trying to write the dialogue, and that actually took me a lot of time, way more time than I expected. And I'll give you an example here. There's one, I would often get stuck on lines and not be able to progress. So here's one page in this book. It's a little bright. But here's a dialogue, and it says, "A perfect day to skip and hop and hike up to a mountain top." And that took me about a month to write that one line. Because when I first thought of the story, the character was going on a hike. And the word that rhymes easily with hike is like. So for a month, I tried to write a dialogue that had hike and rhymed with like, and realized it doesn't work. And eventually I had to scratch it and find the right words. So that took me a lot of time. And along the way, in some places, as I'm writing, sometimes I'll discover that the way I conceive the story is not going to work with the way the story is actually unfolding. And so I'll go back and change the sketches and see if that still fits. And then eventually when I have a dummy, which is a rough mock-up of the whole book, then I can go back and start finalizing things. I was so tired with writing the words for this, I decided to give all the characters stick figures and stick legs. So I wouldn't have to draw them.
No, and actually the question that I said I was going to say for later has to do with rhyming. And, I don't know if are either of you involved in SCBWI?
Yes.
So for those of you who aren't aware that are watching, SCBWI is the Society for Children's Book Writers and Illustrators, and it's basically the international professional organization for kids writers. And I have been a member in the past and on an advisory board and that kind of thing, and attended lots of conferences. And of course, the one thing they tell you to not do is try to write a rhyming picture book, because there are way too many bad ones, I think, is really the problem. And what they really mean is don't write a bad rhyming picture book. And I think it's because a lot of people think, I'm going to write a book for kids and then I'm going to make it rhyme. And they don't realize that you might spend a month on one little tiny stanza to get it right. Like, it's not an easy task. And I think a lot of people will give up and just kind of do a halfway rhyme, or it's not a very good rhyme or whatever, or the story ends up serving the rhyme instead of the other way around. And so I'm wondering what you said that you want, just so you know, that you had the idea of doing it in rhyme. what kept you like going with that? Because it's not easy and it can get really frustrating.
Yeah, I think what kept me going, one is an intellectual challenge. I
Yeah,
really
yeah.
enjoy putting the screws on myself and making it as hard for. I'm kidding. I don't want to make it as hard for myself, but I love rhyming. So I started writing poems when I was about 8 years old, because my mom loved classical poetry, and she had all these books with Lord Byron and poems from Romantic era poets, and the rhyme in that is perfect, right? So I grew up
Yeah,
reading some of those poems, and I grew very influenced by this idea of tight, perfect rhythm and rhyme. And partly I enjoy the challenge, but partly I just love how it sounds to my ears and how it feels on my mouth when I'm reading it aloud.
yeah,
I think that's just fun with language that I
yeah,
love to have and I want to share. And so if I when it turned out to be difficult, of course I had a choice to. Maybe I don't want to tell the story in rhyme, but one of the things my editor was really interested in, she kept saying she's been hearing from a lot of librarians and teachers that people keep searching for alternatives to Dr. Seuss, and there just aren't enough stories in rhyme for early readers
yeah,
to help
yeah,
them have that same love for language. And so my editor was really excited by the prospect of being able to
yeah,
read these graphic novels in rhyme and just present them out there as an alternative for people looking for something new and fresh. And then since I love poetry and I want to share my love for poetry with kids, I was like, I have to do this. Like,
yeah,
if I don't
yeah.
do it, who will do it?
Well, and the only thing I worry about with, kids writers keep getting told, don't do rhyme. And, it's, I, I've read plenty of bad rhyme as I've edited things over the years. And so it's like, yeah, no, I understand why they say this, but I also wonder if we've warned people off a little bit too much sometimes. And maybe we, should encourage them to stick with
There's,
it and
well, the
get
funny thing is
through.
there are a lot of books out there in rhyme. And the other funny thing is you look at some of those books and you're like, this would never get past me or my editor.
Yeah, yeah.
How did
No,
this get
what makes you wonder? It's
how
like,
did this
what?
get out there when everybody says don't write books like this and put them out there? So
Yeah,
okay, so the facts are kids love rhyme and
yeah,
rhyme is hard to do, but it is a skill you can hone with
yeah,
practice. I spend a lot of time actually. I used to write for myself, and it was very good because I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't have the words to express it. I didn't understand the concepts behind rhyming and rhythm and prosody and meter and versification. But there are books out there that teach you all this stuff. And so
yeah,
I did spend the
yeah,
time studying these books and honing my craft and trying to get to the point where I felt I understood what I was doing. And I will say to
yeah,
anybody who wants to write a book in rhyme, look at the formal work out there that teaches you how to do it well
yeah,
and
yeah,
incorporate that into your work, and you'll get there too.
yeah. And prepare to be frustrated at various points.
Yes.
Right. I mean, part of writing in
Yeah,
rhyme is you also want to develop the ear for what's not working when you're writing
yeah,
it.
yeah,
And I think
yeah.
that's where some of the bad rhymes comes from, is that it's easy to make words rhyme, but can you make them
Right.
rhyme in the proper use of English without using
Yes.
contractions and without flipping the subject and the
Yes,
predicate and
exactly.
stuff like that? So,
Or having the emphasis, like the meter be
right.
just
Right.
off,
And
that's
I
not
have this
quite
challenge
right.
that I
And
grew up in India, so I speak with the Indo-British accent. And so when I'm writing, actually the stresses are not in the same place in my head. So it's a double challenge for me to make sure that I write it in such a way that
yeah,
any reader will read it
yeah,
consistently. And so often I throw away my lines because I'm not sure that somebody reading it would read it the same way as I wrote it.
yeah. Well, I was actually going to ask you that, is that I assume that if you had grown up in India, that there you've also speak at least two, if not more, languages. Like, what's your experience of rhyme in, like, in India, in the
Right.
languages
So I,
spoken
I speak
there versus in language,
right.
well, and even like British English versus American English, there's all these different ways of pronouncing things. And
Yes, as Chrissie
Mm.
has an Australian accent. If she read my
yes,
book, it would sound
yes,
completely different if she read
yeah,
it out
Yeah.
aloud. So the English is a tough language to rhyme in.
Yeah.
People love to write romantic poetry in the Romantic era. They love writing in French because they could just rhyme so many words. Same with Hindi, which is my mother tongue. You have so many words and so many concepts that you can rhyme. But in English, you're writing a love poem. You've got love, dove, and above, and that's all you can rhyme it with.
Yeah.
Or a word like orange that you can't even rhyme with anything.
Yeah.
So other languages definitely would be easier to write poetry in. English is tough.
Interesting.
English is
Yeah, I
a
hadn't
tough
thought
act.
about that. Okay, I'm gonna ask for an introduction now. The friend that you have there, Chrissie.
Oh,
Now
I'm
they won't
sorry.
cooperate.
They won't cooperate. They're Sphinx cats.
Well,
and
next
so,
time they come back.
wait, here we go. Here's Stella.
Oh, she's cute.
That's Stella. Now she's
Hello,
just
baby.
going to
Now
go
she's
off.
like, oh, yeah, she's like, now you made me look. I'm
No.
never coming back again. Well, the one that's hanging out here is Oscar. So, and
Oh.
so, yeah, he likes to participate in the interviews.
He's well behaved though, so that's
He's pretty
good
chill.
work, Oscar.
As long as he's sitting on my lap. So I'm gonna jump. Oh, go ahead. No.
Sorry, I did want to add about rhyme as well. I was told by my publishers, because Australia is quite a small, obviously, it's a small population over there. I think it's we've only got 26 million people as our population, and so when it comes to publishing, it's really hard to. Most publishers get their financial support from actually exporting books, and so we were always not encouraged to rhyme our picture books because we can't translate it into other country dialects because obviously it wouldn't rhyme. So that was another big reason why rhyming was not really encouraged. But I did find that a number of picture books that I've written in rhyme, as well as I've illustrated that were rhyme, have been translated into different languages. So it really, like Vikram kind of enforced as well, and yourself, it's a story that really is important in this whole process as well. So yeah. But I did find that there has been a lot of bad rhyme, and also too, even like Australian and US and Canadian accents are different. For example, we say vase instead of vase, that kind of stuff, and so rhyming in those kind of sense is also hard to translate, even in English-speaking countries.
Sometimes I think that we don't give kids enough credit. Like you were talking about putting words in Zuni tales that you knew weren't on the sight words list and that kind of thing. And I think it's like, I know that within my the work that I do for nonfiction for kids, we often have to hit like a reading level target. And but we're not, using a word that kids won't know is not verboten. It's just that you have to use it in such a way that the context gives us a clue about what the word means, or somehow you're defining it in the sentence or that kind of thing. And so I think kids can pick up on that. And actually, I think kids think that's cool, that when they find out that, in different English speaking countries, there are different words for things, and, trolleys and nappies and whatever that's, are not the same thing. And I think that's a kind of a fun exposure for them too. But I think honestly, what it really boils down to is you have to be willing to educate yourself and hone your craft and put in the work. You can't just say, well, it's close enough. It's like, no, that's not gonna fly. No. So I'm curious, Chrissie, I'll start with you on this one. How did you come to be I mean, it sounds, I think from looking at your body of work that you maybe did some illustration first and then started doing writing and illustrating together, or then able to sell your books that were your own writing and illustration. Is that correct?
Well, my very first book that I got published by Penguin Random House was called This Is a Circle. And it was
Okay,
just
yeah, I
about
saw that one.
different
Yeah.
shapes and different animals interacting in a crazy way. But I remember I actually did I wrote it in order to get my illustrations out there, because I wanted to be an illustrator, and that was it. And so I created this particular, and it was Seussian in a way. It was, that Dr. Seuss kind of feel. And the editor that spoke to me about it said, look, we love your writing, but we think we might actually get somebody else to illustrate it. And that was a little bit of an arrow to my heart, because I thought, whoa, everything's being turned on its head. I'm a writer now. I'm not an illustrator. It felt strange, but I was so eager and happy to get a contract that I agreed. But in the end, they decided to take me on as the illustrator too. Yeah. So that's how it started. But it really, I started my journey of trying to get into the children's book industry back in early 2000s. And this was before the internet. And I know, I don't know about in the US, but in Australia we used to have these really huge phone books. We call them the white pages and the yellow pages, and one was a residential, one was business. And I would actually go through the yellow pages and find, all the different publishers. I'd go into bookstores and look on the back of books that I enjoyed, and okay, this one is by Scholastic, so look under Scholastic. And then so I got all their address details, and I would send them photocopies of my work, and send them off, and hope that I would hear back. And maybe 5 months later I'd get a little slip to say, well, hi, thanks, we'll put your illustrations on file. And so it was a very slow process, but that's how it started for me. And it was basically to get my illustrations out there. Yeah,
it is a different animal when you're illustrating, because it's that they put they keep the body of work on file usually for a little while, so you don't necessarily get the straight up do you get the straight up rejection notices, or do you just get we'll just put it in our file, and then you never hear from
them? Exactly. And you never hear from them. Or if anything suitable comes up that we think your work might match, we'll be in touch. And I just got sick of waiting, and so I decided to start writing myself. Yeah.
Vikram, how about you? You said you've been writing poetry since you were very young, and I know you have a background in tech. How did you come to be doing the drawings as well?
So I was doing poetry, and I was actually drawing cartoons from an early age. So when I was in high school and college, I did a lot of cartooning. I had some work published in magazines. And then in grad school, I actually moonlighted as an editorial cartoonist on a daily newspaper for 2 years. So I did a lot of cartooning, but I always thought of these as separate tracks. And it wasn't until I came across a book by Cheryl Silverstein as an adult that I realized I can actually combine cartooning and poetry. How come I never thought of that before? But I actually made my first foray into trying to write a children's book probably around the year 2000. I think my son was about 2 years old. That's when I actually discovered picture books. I'd never read picture books in India. And the first book I tried to write was about a bunch of monkeys in a canoe. And this was in 2001. And I suppose I didn't know what I was doing. I had never heard of the ACPWI. I made every 101 mistake, bad rhyme, poorly done illustration, no good story, no arc, nothing. And I got all the rejection slips. So I would write something, I would send it out, paper mail, wait 6 months, get the rejection slip, And then I'd get dejected and then I'd stop trying for some time. But then the itch kept coming back of trying to make something. And so eventually when I discovered Shel Silverstein, and I had another experience where I stumbled into an exhibition of original Dr. Seuss manuscripts, and it showed his creative process, how he was trying to make rhymes work, cutting stuff out, trying different words, trying to find different ways of saying the same thing. And when I looked at that, I thought, this is how I write poetry. So, if that's how he did it, then maybe I'm not that far off from being able to actually write poetry. And so then I started seriously thinking about writing funny poems like Shel Silverstein. But then the first thing every agent's website would say is, do not tell us your work is like Shel Silverstein and we don't want to see poetry. And so now I was stumped because this is exactly what I wanted to do. And so by 2013 is when I decided if nobody is going to publish my poetry, I'm going to self-publish it. So self-publishing had just started, and I was curious about the whole field. How does it work? So I put together a collection of poems, and I self-published a book called The Bubble Collector, which was a book of about 100 funny poems that I also illustrated. And then I discovered the writing was the easy part. And I didn't have a clue how to sell the book to anybody or how to make anybody take any notice of the book. So I would go on, I would drive to bookstores, knock on the door, walk in and say, hey, I have a self-published book. If they didn't kick me out right at that moment, and they took a look at it, and everybody who looked at it actually liked what I had done, and they would often take 1 or 2 copies, put it at the shelf, and say, come back and collect your consignment fee in a couple of months. And I quickly realized it doesn't scale. I can't drive 40 miles and leave one book in the bookshop and go back after 3 months to collect my $3. And so I decided the next poetry book, traditionally published, no matter how long it takes, no matter how hard it is. And it was hard and it took long, and it just didn't come out till March 2020, the week everything shut down for the pandemic.
Oh, no.
Every bookshop closed and most bookshops didn't see it. But the book went out. It got a couple of, had a star review. It ended up on 7 Best Book of the Year lists, and it was on a couple of state awards. So at least the people who saw it liked it. And that's what I felt. And, the poetry is something I do well. Like, many people can write lovely books, but fewer people can write poetry, and even fewer people can write poetry and combine it with illustrations. So I thought that would be my niche, is try to do rhyme, poetry, and illustration all together.
Yeah. And you are now doing that full time, right?
Yes. So I quit my software job 10 years ago. This is when I self-published the first book. Then I went to art school because I really wanted to learn to actually draw and paint. You can see some of my work behind me. And then I was actually doing the art thing for a long time. So this book came out in 2020. It's my first traditionally published book. Then I did a few others. The one behind me that you see, Boho and Pop Up.
See that.
That I sent that out, and they said, we don't want you to illustrate it. We don't like your illustration style. We'll pick somebody else to illustrate it. So that's illustrated by Nicola Slater. She lives in England. She's a NYD best-selling illustrator. She did a wonderful job, better than I could have done. But then by then I really wanted to do my own illustrated book. So Owl and Penguin became my first non-poetry illustrated series, and this one is also graphic novel. So
and Owl and Penguin is the one that you won the Theodore Geisel honor. That's pretty
lovely
special.
Surprise.
I love that.
So then from Owl and Penguin, which started off as a wordless book, then we added words to it, to Zuni Tales, which is now rhyme plus graphics. And then I'm actually doing another poetry collection that's going to come out next year.
Oh, yay.
Back to poetry.
And you have another Owl and Penguin book coming out too, right?
Correct. So the second Zuni Tales, I don't have a book in June.
Yeah, I can see that.
Zuni goes to space.
Space.
That comes out in June, and then the third Owl and Penguin comes out in October. 2024.
Good. Well, I'm curious about what you both really like about writing and illustrating for kids. So maybe I'll pop back to you, Chrissie, so that we can, and you can take a minute about it, because that one's I recognize that one's a little bit more sort of, whoa, that's a big picture question.
It is. It's big. But at the same time, I just think it's so much fun writing for kids, especially because I love, for example, anthropomorphic ideas. A bear or a fox that has a mobile phone, or a television, or wears pants,
or wants a big
and
screen TV.
that's exactly right. And I just don't think that those particular types of ideas translate well into adults.
Yeah.
Look, I just I'm a big Disney person, and I love Shrek, and I love all those particular types of kids shows, especially. I appreciate them even more now that I'm older and I can, I don't know, it's just, I don't know if it's a fantasy aspect of it, or you can just, there's no real law when it comes to being a kid, and with children, they'll accept whatever is going on. They'll be, oh, right, okay, the bear's got a wand in its head. I mean,
and grants wishes.
And it grants wishes. It's nothing macabre about a bear having something slammed into his skull. It's like, okay, that's fair enough. Let's just go along with that. And so, I don't know. I like the way that the children are more accepting and of a universe, and will just follow its laws, or allow the laws to go. That's pretty much it for me.
What about you?
Definitely, I think kids have this lovely, wide-eyed, innocent view of the world. And if you think of how they develop by the time they're teenagers, they're jaded and cynical, and probably dressed up in black clothes and brooding in their rooms. So there's an age where everything is possible. If you look at all the messages we try to give our young kids, it's all about hope and kindness and empathy, and we are hoping they're going to create a better world, right? And so all the kids' books are positive, I think, because they're trying to project a positive view of what's possible, and because kids have this innocent view, and they can believe, they go through this phase where they're willing to, as Chrissie was saying, they will believe anything is possible, and they'll be more accepting of stories and ideas. It is kind of a fun age to write, to create things for, because you are speaking directly to them. You are showing, you're helping them grow. Every book they read is going to expand their world, and it's helping them develop. And really, our hope is they're going to create a better world than we've created as an older generation. And I also think that every children's book illustrator and author I've met, they have a healthy inner child, and I believe they all write and draw to their inner child first, and then that inner child shares it with the rest of the world in a way that we as little children probably could not have shared with other children. So as kids, I'm sure all creative types were, stereotypically not the life of the party, not the most popular kids. And yet, through our work, we can be the life of the party for the kids who enjoy it.
Yeah. I have always struck when I would attend the children's book, conferences, the writers' conferences and stuff, and how supportive of a community it always was. I mean, we're all competing against each other. It's not that we don't all want to sell a book, and but we all get just as excited when the person next to us has some success as when we do. And I love that about being in the bookstore, because I'll see people that I know get book published, and I'll be like, like, I'm so excited about it, even though it's not mine. And but Chrissie, I was thinking about what you said about, well, you said this too, about kids turning into teenagers, and Vikram, you said the wearing the black and everything, but what I had to laugh about when you said that was, so I have two that are seniors in college this year, and they love Bluey.
Who doesn't?
And I heard so many adults like say how much they love it. I just think that, and I'm always like, you all should read picture books. Everybody should read picture books, no matter how old you are. Just because I think it gives us access to a part of ourselves that we don't let out very often when we become adults. And so I love watching them get all excited about, these 21-year-old kids get all excited about Bluey. Like,
That's so cute.
I am flipping over my paper here. So you mentioned this. I'm going to jump to a little bit to a different subject. Chrissie, you mentioned this a little bit about how it's different to be a writer in Australia, given that the market is smaller, and so you're having to think about, is this book going to reach a market beyond the Australian market? And if so, does that impact, other than maybe not rhyming, does that impact your writing in other ways, maybe subtly, or is that something that, I mean, I guess you probably wouldn't be thinking about that so much when you're actually creating, but when you're out there marketing and talking about books and all of that kind of stuff, how does that experience different for you than I think maybe it would be for somebody here?
It certainly does make an impact even when I'm actually creating an idea. I do have to think about its marketability. I mean, it's lovely to live in the land of I'm doing this, to show, my children or my children's children, and all my family members. But it needs to be able to sell to a broader audience. I have an American agent who looks over my work and gives wonderful feedback in that particular regard, because sometimes I get a little bit excited or passionate about something, and she might say, hey, this is a little bit too niche, or this is a little it doesn't translate, because and this is the thing that I have noticed now that I've had Blizzard, for example, being published in the US through Holiday House, an American publisher, that even though we are Western countries and we are English speaking, there's culturally there are quite big differences. And so when it comes to different things that might be a little bit, we're treading on a little bit of a dangerous, not a dangerous, but like, that might not go down too well with US audiences, or that type of thing. It's definitely, there are things, languages, like you were saying before, nappy and trolley and all that type of thing, all those different words that have to be replaced, and even like neighbor, for example, we spell it with a U instead of just an O, and all that type of. I do now think more in terms of my idea, would this appeal to an American audience or a broader market as opposed to an Australian market? So I do think that.
Do you think, and I'm going to ask Vikram this too in a second with a little bit of a spin, but do you think do you think there's times where American publishers fret about that a little too much and don't give kids credit? Like, this is purely speculation, so I'm not asking you to like rag on any publishers or anything, but
no, because my
really curious, because sometimes I feel like we make assumptions about kids, like even as American publishers, being at children's writing conferences and kind of listening to the editors sit around and talk amongst themselves, and they'll make comments about some cultural reference. I mean, honestly, even within the United States, because a lot of them are very much city people, and there'll be like a reference to something rural, and they'll be like, well, that's not real. And we'll be like, oh, but it is. So I'm curious whether there's times where you feel like maybe we sell kids short a little bit, that they can't, maybe with a little help, pick up on like a cultural difference, or words that,
I
but
think so. I do think so. I can understand the overcautiousness,
yeah,
and but at the same time, I think kids are hugely intelligent and intuitive, and I think that we don't give them enough credence in that
yeah, yeah,
department a lot. But I do understand your
yeah,
overcautiousness. It's better to be too cautious
yeah,
sometimes, I
yeah.
think, than the other way around.
And
So
I do
yeah.
appreciate it when it's cultural differences where somebody might be hurt by, something
Mm,
said. I mean, I'm all for being careful of that. Sometimes I just wonder
yeah.
about, like a different kind of a spelling or whatever, if we don't, give them a little credit for
Yeah.
being able to figure that out. So Vikram, since you have an even broader cultural like reference points across a couple of different cultures, do you find that too as well? Editors trying to smooth it out because they are worried that kids
Yeah,
won't get it.
yeah. It's not so much. I think they worry that kids won't get it, as they are just sensitive, as you said. They don't want to have things in the books that some people can find culturally offensive, or
Yeah, yeah,
if you look back, if you go back and look at the last 100 years of kids' books, there are some very well-known award-winning books that would never get published today
yes,
because
yeah,
they just
Yeah.
they just have not aged well. We don't have
yeah,
this,
Mm,
we are much more
yeah,
sensitive to issues and how people feel about them and what's fair and what's just and what's
right,
the right
right,
way to say and do things that in previous times authors and editors might not have given much thought to.
yeah,
So growing
yeah,
up in India, the most one of the authors I read the most was Enid Blyton. She's a British author, probably the world's
mhm.
best-selling children's book author with 600 million books in print. Her work has not aged well. There are a lot of tropes in there that now we can look back and
yeah,
say,
yeah,
that's just wrong. That's just wrong. Or even the way the stories are structured. The narrative arc we think about, the educational points we think about, some of those are just missing from that
yeah,
older work. And it's not that they wrote it intentionally. It was just different times they wrote books in a different context. That was what they knew how to do back then. I would like to think that today we know how to do things
yeah,
better than
yeah,
before. At the same time, I am sensitive to the fact that publishing is a business, right? And the decision makers who buy the books are not the kids, it's the parents, the teachers, the librarians, the grandparents. And
yeah,
so
yeah,
the publishers have to be sensitive to the fact that the book has to appeal to the person who's paying for it
buying it.
and going to
Yes,
take it at
yeah,
home or to the classroom.
yeah,
And to ignore that, I think would just harm the business itself, and then we wouldn't have as many
yeah,
books out
yeah,
there. So it's just that balancing act that anybody has to
Mm,
walk when they're trying to create a product for a market with the hope that it will have a good reception and
yeah,
meet the needs. And for kids, the needs are educational. And I get surprised when people, I read reviews of my own books and they are so centered on the educational value of the book. But I wasn't really thinking about that when I was writing the book. I wanted to write a book that kids would find fun. But I
yeah,
realized that the
yeah,
people who are making the purchasing decisions have a different viewpoint. And so
yeah,
going forward, I'm going to have to think about what is the
yeah,
educational value
yeah,
here? Can I articulate it? Is it
mm.
intentional, or I'm just expecting it to accidentally happen? So it's an evolving thing.
yeah,
I wouldn't hold it against anybody to be sensitive about what they put in any book that they put out there.
yeah. No, and that I totally agree with. We actually had somebody in today, and I won't specifically mention the author, but they were complaining about an author that's been um well, they use the word banned, but this author hasn't been banned. They're just being phased out of certain things just because there's depictions in their book that aren't that great. And this person was very, passionate about the fact that this is not a big deal. And I thought, well, yes, but to a person who's from the culture that's being poorly depicted, it is a big deal. So we need to be careful of that. And
I'm definitely coming from India. I had a completely different viewpoint on many things. When I started editorial cartooning, I would get into a lot of trouble because I would rely on a stereotype that to me was perfectly okay coming from where I was coming, but was perfectly not okay for the audience I was creating the work for. And so I learned very quickly that I need to think harder about what I do and how I do it and how this is going to come across and how people are going to feel about it. And it's a burden I bear as a creator to try and get it as right as I can.
Yeah. And it's always, I'm always having people look over whatever it is that I'm doing. It's particularly if find myself writing about a community that I'm not a part of. I want to know that, as hard as I work to make it be respectful and okay, I don't know whether I've missed the mark or not, unless somebody from that community can look at it and say, no, it's, this is fine, or I think that in general this will be fine, or I know you didn't mean this, but you said this thing and that was totally not cool. And then I totally understand why they're being super careful of that. Sometimes I worry that we make things a little bit too easy for kids, like from a reading level point of view or whatever. So I love that what you said earlier about putting words in that aren't sight words, because I do feel like kids can pull from the context and figures. And then the really wonderful thing about either illustrated or graphic work is that there's also visual context too to help them figure out what's going on, which I love. So, well, thank you. That was fun to talk about, because I'm always wondering, when you're writing across cultures or your writing is going to end up in different parts of the world, what things you have to think about that maybe you wouldn't have realized, or people wouldn't realize that you're having to kind of keep in your head. And you can see what time it is, because we're just, oh my gosh, we should probably wrap up. This has been fun. I have not even been paying attention to the clock. So if you could let us know again, because we talked a little bit about this throughout the course of the interview, but if you all could let people know how to find you either online or social media, and then remind us what you have coming out in the next few months, because I want people to know, and we'll definitely be getting this stuff into the store too if people want to pre-order or anything like that. So go ahead and go first, Chrissie, if you'd like.
So Bizzard the Bear Wizard is out in all good bookstores around the US. And in, I believe it's February of 2024 is Bizzard and the Big Bunny Business, and that will be out then. So those are the two Bizzards that are coming out.
Getting up to some kind of rascally activities, I'm quite sure.
Yes, and they've all been endorsed by Stella. So there we go. There's Stella saying hello.
Stella. And are you on social media at all?
Oh, sorry. Yes, I am. I'm just because I'm a little bit social media. What would you say, non-savvy? I don't even know if that's a word, but I am on Instagram just under Chrissie Krebs, and I also have a website called chrissiekrebs.net. So if anybody wants to contact me through there, they can.
Okay. And Vikram, you've got stuff coming out in the new year too, don't you?
Yes. So the second Zuni Tales book comes out next June.
Okay.
And then the third Owl and Penguin. This is the second Owl and Penguin. I dropped the first one. It's on the floor.
That's right.
This came out in May, one comes out in October of 2024. I have a follow-up poetry book with a different publisher, Astra Word Song. That's going to come out next November, I believe, and that is a poetry collection in graphic novel format.
Oh, fun. Oh, I love that.
Graphic novel in rhyme to poetry collection and graphic novel, and that's called Beware the Dragon and the Nozzle Walk, a funny graphic novel poetry collection full of surprising characters. That's the whole title. That's what they wanted it to be.
Oh, wow.
My social media is here, Art by Vikram. You can see it on the screen next to my name. You should be able to see it.
Oh, there you are. Yeah. Okay.
And then you can just search for my name and you'll find my website and everything else on it.
And I can put your website. I will add all that for those of you watching. Look in the description below, because I'll put them there. And just to remind everybody, we have book club tomorrow. Please come. You don't have to come to the store. You can stay in your comfy clothes, and we're Sci-Fi Fantasy Book Club this month is reading Soul Jar, edited by Annie Carl. And we're going to be talking tomorrow night at 7:00 via Zoom. We thought that particularly because this collection of stories centers the disability experience, it would be nice if we had a medium that people could use even if they can't leave their house. So we would love to have you participate. Shoot an email to books@vintage-books.com, all lowercase, and I will send you the Zoom link. So just make sure you do that before 6:00 tomorrow night, because I leave the store at 6 and I won't get your email after that. But we'd love to have you join us. We'd love to have you join us next week at 7 on Tuesday, when we're going to have Catherine McNair on. Her book Mischievous Creatures just came out today. And that's an adult nonfiction book. So thank you again, Vikram and Chrissie, for being with us tonight. It was so much fun. And good luck with all your books coming out next year. I'm so excited to see them all.
Thank you,
Christie.
Have a good night.
Yeah.
Or a good day, as the case may be. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.